Hello and welcome to BRAIDAR, the Business of Beauty. My name is Jaden Paru and welcome to the show. So basically, we have been talking a lot about different strategies. We've been talking a lot about different historical examples, different artifacts that I've pulled from the Museum of like Nostalgia and Personal Experience and just documented like shared experiences like from the internet and different people's sort of retrospectives on things like TV shows, flash games, girls go games, that type of thing. And I think today I want to kind of this episode is kind of a mixture of different things that we've kind of touched on before, but this is almost like a case study of how it can be executed in a particular sort of niche or particular like um not subculture, but just a particular channel through which you can kind of put some of these things into practice. And that is the movie beauty, movie fashion, character type of tie in. So let me cast your mind back to a time gone by. It is 2016, I believe, and it's summer and you're really excited for this new movie that's coming out. It's about superheroes. It's got some cool like characters. It's about villains and anti-heroes and it's called Suicide Squad. And basically I feel like a lot of Suicide Squad's legacy is, I mean, aside from what people say in terms of like the the plots, the scripts, the other aspects which I'm not going to talk about and which don't really concern me today. Aside from what people may say about that, I think a large part of his legacy is that sort of the iconography and the sort of stamp that the way a character looks and a character's aesthetic has made on like pop culture and on a sort of, I wouldn't say generational because this is something that people of like different ages like were able to partake in, but a certain section of society were able to kind of tap into that and put their own spin on it and make it their own. And in particular, I'm talking about Harley Quinn. So some of you might remember that following Suicide Squad, coming out in cinemas, Harley Quinn was everywhere. On YouTube, people were doing like Harley Quinn makeup tutorials. People were doing Harley Quinn like inspired outfits. People were doing like Harley Quinn wig installs. Like they make do a frontal like 613 frontal with like the ponytails and the red and the blue like dip dye. It was just something that I think the general sort of consciousness really latched onto because I think for a number of reasons, but I think largely because her character and her sort of attitude and outlook is very like digestible in that by looking at her, you're immediately like it immediately sort of connotes what she's about. Like she's sort of zany, she's offbeat, she's weird, but she's also slightly like when you look closer at how she's sort of odd and she's weird, it's actually something deeper. It's actually symptomatic of something that's not all not all right, not all perfect. And I feel like not only can the audience relate to that in obviously not in the same way, like I'm not sort of assuming that people have personally jumped into vats of toxic waste before in their like past experience, but I think in their own sort of ways they can map her behavior like as presented in the movie onto their own circumstance. And there's a whole sort of valid discussion in there as to whether it's you know desirable to like want to map someone like Harley Quinn onto your own life and kind of like model your behavior off of her or see similarities and patterns in the way that she handles things, in the way that her characters like trauma and um sort of like how she's taken advantage of and like sort of like disregarded and disrespected and all of that, if that's actually something that we want to present in a way that's so like cutesified, if that makes sense, or like at least that glosses over all those things and tries to spin it as like a positive, like something that adds like girl boss factor, when it's something that, you know, should be addressed in a slightly different way. I feel like there's definitely a very valid argument in that, but I think just the fact that what ended up happening was that it was sort of people picked her up and ran with her. I think that's something that for today I'm gonna like angle my discussion on, even though I'm definitely acknowledging that the the issues are still there and the reality of like the trauma and sort of surviving abuse and domestic abuse, and how these are things that shouldn't really be trivialized and be sort of romanticized. I think that that's definitely really important. But yeah, I just want to signpost that. So, in terms of Harley Quinn, I feel like that I've touched on it by saying like you'd have like wig tutorials on YouTube, but you also have like cosplayers. You'd also have like people trying to make like Harley inspired outfits using clothes they already have. So you've got the like lifestyle and the people who do like shopping hauls from different like fashion outlets. You've got that kind of audience, and I suppose within that you've also got like film criticism channels and commentary channels who kind of like are putting their slant on what's like capture the zeitgeist at the moment, at that moment. And so I think it's a good example as to how a particular aspect of like a franchise, or even if you want to like assume in some kind of hypothetical world there's a Harley brand like independent of the sort of DCEU sort of complex sort of like infrastructure. It's a good example of how you can kind of use that audience like uptake and audience interest and what they're kind of organically tapping into and how they're representing it in their own like ways and for their own like target audiences. You can use that to kind of inform your own like way in which you then like bring out more, whether it's more content about that character or whether it's merchandise surrounding that character. You can use that to make those decisions more accurate in terms of making sure it actually appeal to people. So let's say and I don't know if Warner Brothers are gonna start like making wigs anytime soon, like bundles. I don't think they're gonna be selling those, but assuming that it were a beauty brand that was behind the sort of IP that just like was on fire in that time, I think that would be such a good tie-in. Like, can you imagine? Can you imagine if there's like a character that has a really iconic hairstyle or iconic hair color, and everyone's like, "Oh, like, how do I get this?" Because you know, even like mixing pigments to get that exact shade is not easy. So to remove that kind of layer of friction and to like immediately meet the audience like where they are in terms of like their pain point, you could just the beauty brand could just like come out with their own like bottled hair dye for that color, for example, or their own bundles that are that color, or frontals, or different things like that. I think that would be so cool, and it would also be quite impressive. Like, even if I'm not into buying like bundles or whatever, I would still be impressed. Like, oh, okay, like their fingers actually on the pulse of what's happening. They're actually responsive. They're actually like in the know, and that has a an impact on like brand salience and whether people, not whether people like respect the brand, but like, you know, how they kind of view the brand, even if they're not like the target audience. It kind of warms them up to the brand in a way. And so I think there's a lot of kind of going off of that example. There's a lot that the beauty space and the fashion space can kind of capitalize on in terms of like movies and TV and sort of existing IP. Like, for example, there's a girl on YouTube who, like, her whole sort of niche is helping people build up their businesses, and her target audience is like young black women. And so a lot of the content that she creates might be around certain products that are very popular for entrepreneurs who fall within that target audience. Like, for example, clothing boutiques, hair boutiques, cosmetics, candles. Those are the kind of things that she makes her content around. And I remember that. Oh yeah, I forgot to say her name. By the way, her name is Jazanier. So it's JASX. Then her surname is AIGNER. I think I got that right. By the way, I'm not paid by her. I don't know her in real life. I don't have any sort of parasocial like allegiance to her. I just think it's worth shouting out like the kind of like gems that she would put out there for free, like for anyone to kind of take advantage of. But I just really like her insights in terms of like such good sort of takes on things, and then what makes it like what's actually really impressive about it is that it's for such a specified like audience in terms of like, this is kind of a tangent, but if you picked up like a marketing textbook, for example, today, I don't think you necessarily find something like that exactly maps onto the business idea that you have, especially if it's something like I don't know, how to scale up your lashes business or your like extensions business. It's not, those things are not sort of like mainstream enough that I think that you would like find them in the literature like that. But here she is like filling that gap and making sure that people still have the resources to kind of make informed decisions even when they're in those niche industries. So yeah, the actual thing, to get to the actual thing that she said, she was talking about how one of the trends that she's forecasting for the next year, like after the period in which she made that video, was synthetic wigs. And to give people a little bit of the background, basically the sort of black hair extension space, and I'm just using that as like an easy nickname for like the wigs and like bundles and weaves and extensions industry, when I'm aware that it's not just black people who like wear them, but I think for the sake of like just being brief and just being like easy to understand, I'm just going to use that term, but you know what I mean. So basically the synthetic offerings that were like in the beauty supply stores, which are like, if you can imagine a corner store, but a corner store that sells like makeup and hair stuff and sells like hair extensions. I think that's a good way to describe like beauty supply stores. So the synthetic like wigs on synthetic like weaves that were in those stores, they like historically there was a big difference between the synthetic and the actual like real hair that you could buy. They did sell real hair, but it was just, I don't know, I think it's that thing of like the place that you encounter a product does impact your perception of it. So because beauty supply stores are not exactly like luxury stores, it kind of rubs off on the synthetic products in a way that they're perceived to be like of less value than the real hair, which I mean, they kind of are just like in terms of literal like monetary value, and in terms of like the life cycle of the product, like synthetic doesn't traditionally last as long as real hair. But that kind of perception was how like people were viewing the synthetic sort of side of the industry, even when the synthetic offerings started to improve and started to like become more comparable to the actual like real hair in terms of texture, in terms of like how it actually looks. You wouldn't necessarily be able to tell as easily if you weren't someone who'd like spent time researching or was really like familiar and well versed in like the differences. And even in terms of like color options, they've now got like ombre synthetic, they've got like, you know, honey blonde, ash blonde, they've got like all the like the buzzwords and the keywords and the trends, they've got it in synthetic versions. And even the lace that they use in the synthetic like lace wigs, even the lace they use in the synthetic lace wigs are like more like they're higher quality nowadays, you know? So you can actually like kind of install it in a way that the end result will not be like that. It won't be noticeable from the end result that you're wearing a synthetic wig. It might be noticeable in other aspects, like maybe like heat styling may not work out as well, but in terms of the actual look of the lace, it would kind of give you the look of the lace used on real hair wigs, if that makes sense. So what she was saying was that because this perception has still been maintained when the product's quality has increased and improved, that means that there's kind of an opportunity there for a brand to kind of occupy that space of, we are the luxury synthetic hair brand. And I think obviously there's work to do in terms of like changing people's perception, but I think that's where like marketing comes in, and that's where like purposeful campaigns come in. That's where like, I don't know whether you want to do influencer marketing, even though that's a whole other thing which I talked about, but maybe you want to do like UGC, which is actually what I see a lot of hair companies doing. They do UGC to kind of promote their synthetic wigs. But the main point is, she was saying that how she would do it to kind of carve out her niche in the synthetic wig space would be to target, like for her target audience, she would focus on cosplayers, and she would focus on like, not necessarily non-naturalistic, but in a way non-naturalistic wigs, because it's like, for example, if you want to get, trying to think of a random example now, but if you want to get like Natsu's hair from Fairy Tale, you know, I don't think you would want to start from like a wig that's like color 2, as in like dark brown, and then you start thinking, how do I dye this? And you start thinking, how do I cut this? And you start thinking, how do I style this? Like, maybe you want to do that for the challenge, or maybe you want to do that for like, it'll obviously be cheaper than a customized wig, but there's definitely an opportunity there to kind of like, you take the friction out of that styling process and that dyeing process and that like customizing to look like the character process, and give them the finished product, which is actually what they need. And you give them what they want, which is like, I want to look like X character for like, whether it's Comic-Con, whether it's like a party, whether it's just like, that's just what I want. That's what I want to be looking like just for fun or for me. Like, you can offer them that. And because basically, obviously you have people who do like customized wigs and things for people, but because, at least that I know of, there's no other sort of company that's offering that, or like someone's brand, as in like they've scaled it to like a side hustle that has a website and has like branding and has like packaging that's branded and all that type of stuff. You can kind of make a name for yourself in that sense. And I think that is so cool, because like, I think it's just fun. I think it's just maybe even more fun, like, than doing customized wigs where you might customize according to like a style, like, you know, when skunk stripes were all the rage, or like, do you guys remember slime green wigs? Okay, like only the OGs will remember, but slime green wigs on YouTube were something else. Like, they look really nice, but like, what I mean is, you could kind of keep stock of X amount of slime green wigs, but then as you're like dyeing them and as you're like customizing them, like straightening them, like, I imagine it could get repetitive. Whereas if you want to keep stock of like X character, for example, and you offer a range of characters, rather, you wouldn't necessarily like keep excess stock of one character and then like make 2 of another. No, like, you'd kind of flesh out your range, like whether you want to do like the Fairy Tale collection, or you want to do the Sailor Moon collection, or you want to do like whatever takes your fancy. Like, you can kind of express your creativity in that. And because it doesn't have to be like exactly like, oh, it has to be exactly like this frame of this episode, like this second, you know, it has to, the cowlick has to be at the same like angle. If not, you know, it's not like that. You can kind of really have fun with it, and you can really like, you could take inspiration from how they look like later on in a season, or you can take inspiration from a particular arc or particular look. And I think that is so fun. I think that's so fun, and I think it also lends itself to more engaging like content. Like, obviously it's nice to see the behind the scenes of how people like pluck the wigs and like dye them and like do the partings and then do like the hairline, make it look really nice. But I think that because you're doing it based on a character, you've got a story already inbuilt. And so then, for example, that's your like, if you're on TikTok, like that's your backing music sorted. You can just use like the opening themes. Like you just pick one that you like and then use it, or you could use like a clip from like the show, like them saying something that would be really clever. And you've also got a community like that knows those references and that knows those like things that you're using to make your stuff more engaging, and so then they're more likely to comment, like to like more likely to comment, as in they give you that engagement. They might be like, oh, so cool, like, oh, that's my favorite episode. They might be like, oh, like, wasn't it so sad when XYZ happened, or like, have you seen the new season, like, what's your thought on how they adapted this in the anime, blah blah blah. Like, it's so dynamic, and I think it would be really cool to see. And I mean, she made this video, I think 2 years ago, just kind of detailing how that's the approach she would take, and how synthetic wigs in particular would kind of allow her that flexibility in terms of like synthetic wigs have way, way more color options than like real hair wigs. I think just because of the fact that it's a plastic fiber, you can kind of like the actual plastic, you can color the plastic before you turn it into like stringy fibers, if that makes sense. Whereas the hair, you have to like it's just harder. It's just harder. It's not important how it's harder. It's just harder. So, yeah, I think that would be so cool. And I think you could actually push that further, in that like you could also do it for like clothing boutiques. Like, how maybe people have like a design that they send to a manufacturer, and the manufacturer makes a design, and then they can put it up on their website, and they can do like different drops, different collections, and they can like, obviously they have a target audience, hopefully, but they can kind of theme it around certain things, like whether they want to be like, our brand is Y2K, our brand is like, I don't know what you want to say, like office chic. Office chic is not a thing, but you know what when I say it, you have an idea of what I'm saying in your head. So just don't lie. You know what I'm actually talking about. Like like corporate girl boss, cute. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. So I feel like those are quite popular, and I feel like if you kind of went further and were like, I want to do this, like something in the same vein as like cosplaying, but also things that can double for like everyday wear. I think like you will have people lining up to purchase your goods, because like let me even think of an example to just give you, like, even if you did, let's say, Bratz, let's use the example from, I think it was episode 3 or 2. If you had a particular Bratz doll, you've got so many things that you can kind of like do content for and then make into actual products that you're actually selling. So you've got the hairstyles. I'm not talking about the hair like after you've like combed it, washed it with dish soap, and like it looks scattered. Just as it is in the packet, you can kind of be like, hey guys, watch me recreate this Sasha's like wavy bob. I don't know like what the hair would be, but you can kind of recreate it, and you can put your own spin on it. Like whether you want to say, watch me recreate Sasha's hair but with braids, or watch me recreate Sasha's hair but with curly hair, or with straight hair, or with whatever hair. Like, I think that would be really interesting, because not only are you kind of tapping into that nostalgia factor, you're tapping into the fact that there's an inbuilt Bratz like fandom, but you're also being like, hey, this is what makes me me, this is what makes my brand like so cool. You want to align yourself with us, purchase our stuff, like follow us. Like obviously you're not gonna say the stuff like yourself. You're not gonna say that, but implicitly that's what you're saying, because that's what branding is all about. Like people buy it because they want to align themselves with a particular image or a particular like implicit brand promise. Like, oh, you buy Nike shoes, you want to be the best athlete ever, or you buy I don't know, you buy something else because you want that thing. Like you want that promise. You want that either excellence or sort of social standing that it's connoting, different things like watches, for example. So where was I? Yeah. So you've got the hair, right? But also, remember when I said a major part of the Bratz is the makeup looks? Now, I don't know if I mentioned this in that episode, but everybody it's a common thing to kind of point out how Bratz makeup screenings can be almost like exactly mapped onto that whole like matte finish kind of Instagram kind of like YouTube makeup guru look from, you know, like 20, let's say late 2015 to 2019. I'll be generous and say 2019 is when it like the kind of bounds of this trend. But like it's just, I don't know, not to get sidetracked again, but it's just so cool. Like I'm not gonna say it's because of some kind of subconscious like harkening back to their childhood, harkening back to like better times, like better fashion that people decided to kind of go with this look in terms of it picking up steam and becoming popular. But I do think that for whatever reason that it, or whatever combination of reasons that it became popular, it's uncanny that it just so happened to look like the dolls that we all played with. So, but yeah, the actual point of this is that the makeup is another like thing that you can kind of make a video around, like behind the scenes thing around, or you could even do like, you know how on I've seen it on Pinterest, but I guess it's originated on TikTok. But people will be like, "Oh, I'm gonna like watch me recreate this look, but on brown skin. Watch me recreate this look, but with I don't know, like with freckles or something like that. Like something about you that makes you unique, and then you're like interpreting the source material through that lens. Because I think people want to see that because, like, even if you feel you're sort of, I don't know, even if you feel that kind of sense of, oh, like, people may not get my, like, where I'm coming from, people may not get my slant on things, I guarantee that there's someone who shares some characteristic of what you have to offer, and that person will greatly value you being able to, like, show them a way of, like, I don't know, like a way of celebrating that or a way of, like, reconceptualizing that because, you know, maybe that person may not be that like confident in that whatever characteristic that is, but then by you kind of offering a way of reconceptualizing it, it offers an opportunity that obviously they don't have to take it, but it's an opportunity to kind of view that thing in a different light. And if someone chooses to, it can actually like help boost their, like, I don't know, just boost their, even if it's just boosting their afternoon, like it doesn't have to be a grand thing to make a big impact on someone and how they feel. And I think that's a really cool thing. So yeah, we've got the hair, we've got the makeup, and we've got the outfits. So yeah, that was a real reason for me to pick Bratz as an example, is because you know their outfits so cute. Like as I said before, they use real like material like satin, or they'd use like denim, and they'd actually do like the stitching, like the detailing in the stitching, and they'd actually like hem the outfit. Like obviously I can go on about this, but attention to detail and like realism, I feel like is what made the kind of diegetic world of brats being like teenagers but also being hyper fashionable. Like I feel like that's what made me buy into it personally. So yeah, you could be like, oh, watch me you know, watch me recreate this like Chloe's outfit from the styling slumber party play sale. You know, you could, I feel like I feel like you don't have to mention the playset or like the collection or the pack that it came from, but I feel like if you do, that is like, you know, a secret tip that you can kind of like, you know, when people say like, oh, you just unlocked that memory for me, like what, like people would be like, why do I remember this? Like what, you know, that feeling. It's just because you happen to mention it that it prompts them to remember, but it's something so small that can kind of like get you a lot of engagement and a lot of like, I don't know the word for it, but it's not sympathy, but it's something to do with like affiliation or even just being like feeling in the same group as someone. Like it warms your audience up in terms of like they're able to feel like they can start to like group their experience with yours and then by extension like themselves with your brand. So yeah, you can kind of recreate the outfits, like whether it's the prom outfits, whether it's the Sweet 16 outfits, or like when they went to Paris or when they went to like Tokyo. Like I could kind of go on and on because there's a lot of fashion packs out there and like play sets that they did that I like just somehow remember like really vividly. But yeah, you can kind of recreate that, and it's up to you whether you want to like stay faithful to the actual like design that they sold with the like different packs, or you could interpret it in like uh different lens. Like maybe if you want to reinterpret it in your own, not your own personal style, but like you could reinterpret it in the whole like Y2K trend. And I know like maybe you're thinking, hey, but brats are actually Y2K. Like brats are actually part of the sort of aesthetic inspiration for this like Y2K trend. But I think, and this is like promoting my another one of my own like things, just because I guess I can. It's basically this whole like Y2K trend that's been sort of people have been working with and like engaging with and like love for the past few years. This conceptualization of Y2K is not the same as the actual Y2K era. This conceptualization of Y2K is kind of colored by other things, not least sort of the I think the idealization of that era by people who, yes, we lived through it, but we didn't really like we don't really remember our lived experience of the actual like era, and even that lived experience is not like it's not comparable to someone who like went to high school in this era that we're getting inspiration from, or someone who was in middle school or was in college. It's kind of like you went to playgroup or like kindergarten, but it's like you know what I mean? Like it's not it it doesn't it's not like the same kind of lived experience. And so for that reason, it's more like we have a claim to Y2K in terms of like that sense of affiliation, that sense of like, oh yeah, this is our time. Like it's something familiar, nostalgic, but it's not nostalgic in the same way as like traditional nostalgia would be of like, oh, I remember when this show was on Cartoon Network. I used to watch it after school every day. You know, it's a different kind of thing. And I think also it's partially different because it's impacted by different trends that we did live through, and particularly trends that we lived through in like those like middle school, like early high school years. Like I feel like it's kind of colored by um the whole I don't even know what you would call this. I maybe you could say like the Tumblr aesthetic of like the high waisted stuff plus like maybe a cropped top, or like just those kind of I don't know how to explain it, but like the proportions that a lot of the fashion trends of that category, the proportions they were working with in terms of like the looks that were popular and the pieces that you'd combine, I feel like I can see a lot of that mapped onto how Y2K is reconstructed through our like unique Gen Z lens. And so if you want to know more about that, I wrote an article. It's like reviewing Catwalk, like the fashion show last year. It's called De and Reconstructing an Era. So you can Google that, you can read it, and then it's basically talking about like this thing of like how Y2K in our view is different from like the real Y2K. Not the real, but I guess like the historical, yeah, the historical Y2K. But it doesn't mean that our sort of take on it and I guess reclaiming, even though there's nothing that kind of took it away from us, but our like sort of claiming of it and our creative license sort of reliving, reimagining of it is of no less worth than the actual like historical period and the actual like yeah, you get what I mean. So yeah. Anyway, back to the actual example of how you can kind of like deconstruct a Bratz doll to create like a very cohesive and very like nostalgia and fandom based like not only content calendar but like product arsenal or catalog. Yeah, catalog sounds less insidious, so let's go with catalog. So yeah, you can kind of make the outfit look like the Y2K trend of like the early 2020s, like you're very familiar with what that would be. Or you could do like people who do the historical like sewing and historical fashion. I feel like a lot of people are really really good at like not only the actual craft of like being like a tailor or a seamstress, but they're good at sort of following the like staying faithful to the actual practice of making in those eras. So like they actually use the same like materials, the same techniques, the same like approaches to like creating something. And even if modern sort of technology would kind of make that easier or make it more efficient, they kind of deliberately want to stay true to that like embodied practice of like someone in that period making this. And I think that does lend a sense of like authenticity to the product. But even having said that, you could kind of be like, I'll make um like Yasmin's like, I don't know, I'll make Yasmin's dress, but I'll make it for this era. And you can kind of like take from both kind of like sources and both aspects of inspiration to create something new. And I feel like that would be a nice thing to do because people like feel inclined to comment, even if it's them saying like, oh, like, and I would never would have thought you, I never would have thought someone could kind of mesh them in this way, or when you did that, that was cool, or they might even suggest like other like remixes for you to do. So I think that that's so interesting and it's so dynamic again because you're making that like conversation between you as the content creator or as the creative sort of entity in this particular exchange and your audience. You're making it like very back and forth. You're making it like they have a bit of skin in the game. They have a bit of like they're stakeholders and they're actually impacting the final product and the creation of future products and also your perception of your own product. So that is quite cool. And obviously, like, I guess it goes without saying, like, if people are being mean, if people are trolling you, people are being like, what? Why would you make that? Like, if that's the kind of engagement that it's kind of getting, then 100%, like, I would be all for, like, you could limit comments, you could restrict, you could block. Like, don't, I would not say that engagement and all these, like, metrics for being a content creator online or a social media manager or anything, I wouldn't say that those are worth your mental health or worth being like tormented by someone who could be like, I don't know, 10 years old and just like, I don't know, just going off for some reason. But yeah, so just kind of keep that in mind and like try and weigh up what you feel the trade-off, like a good trade-off is in terms of like exposure versus kind of protection and like shielding yourself from certain things, because I think it can get out of hand really quickly. But if you kind of sit down and establish that, and especially if you like write it out, or if you have someone to like, if you, I don't know, if you have a team that's working with you on your social media stuff, you can kind of like designate a role to kind of keep those checks and balances and just like, I don't know, moderate or just put boundaries in place and things. So yeah. So we've done the hair, we've done the makeup, we've done the outfit. I think shoes are quite interesting because again, I feel like there's a more considerable barrier to entry for shoes than for like if you make like a makeup line, because no, let's just leave that. There's definitely a higher barrier to entry for shoes because I feel like it's not as easy for people to, obviously you can like outsource it. I'm sure like as people are outsourcing clothing, you can outsource shoes. As people are outsourcing like mixing the product formula, you can outsource shoes. But personally, I've not seen it. So in that kind of like the niche not being as saturated, maybe, you know, there's a space for you to be like, oh, I'm gonna make Jade's shoe from the styling, slamming something collection, and then you like recreate the shoe, but you make it kind of, obviously you make it practical. Like you don't have to do like a scale replica, because I think people will be falling off, falling down, because Brat's feet are not exactly realistic. They're not exactly like to scale for your audience. But yeah, I guess that goes without saying. But that could be something cool. That could be really cool because you can kind of position it as, obviously, if there's more considerable like costs, like upfront costs of like obviously creating it and the materials that you're using, I think because some shoes might need like more, for example, durable materials or just certain materials that are inherently more expensive, you could actually position your brand as a more even if it's not luxury in the sense of like how luxury has become commodified. And I think maybe I'll do that next week, but I think luxury has become very commodified in terms of commodity commodified, right? That's the. I'm just gonna leave that alone because you know what I'm trying to say. But I think luxury has become more and more homogenized because of this like commodification. Because when you try and say like you want to brand your stuff as luxury, it's almost like you've got a certain style pack to like follow. And I feel like those things are almost just like cargo culting luxury. They're not actually making it luxurious. They're just making it look minimalist, or they're just making it look black, or they're just making it look with gold accents, you know, and expensive. So I feel like actually branding something as luxury, maybe there's a bit more to it than that. And I feel like some, for example, like maybe handbag brands that are not the sort of huge fashion houses and like established designers, the way that they're trying to do their luxury is like through quality of material, for example, and not necessarily through just cargo culting the like aesthetics of the aesthetics of luxury. I think that's what's being um cargo culting is basically like when you take the aesthetic of something and then map it onto something else and then say that because of that it becomes that first thing. Obviously, nothing wrong with taking inspiration, nothing wrong with someone setting the tone, the trend, and having those who follow, but it doesn't necessarily make X Y. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't mean like this has done this, therefore this is equal to this. It's just more like, okay, you know, this is inspired by, this wants to be like. I think that's even more what it connotes. It connotes that you want to be like this rather than like it is this in its own right, and it rather than like it is equitable to and on the same level as that. So that is a whole other conversation. But in the example, you could actually make your shoe brand like more of a luxury purpose in the sense of luxury being an infrequent purchase for like a particular target audience, or being like uh like an infrequent purchase, because that will give you some leeway and some wiggle room to space out your collections in terms of like when you drop the collections, if that's how you want to like structure your distribution. But I think that would be a good way, because it makes sense for a luxury brand to kind of not like, it's not every time like it sells out you restock and then like, oh, whenever I want it I can get it. You got to add that sense of like scarcity, because yeah, so it would make sense because it gives you that wiggle room. Whereas if you kind of make it a more, not trendy, but you get what I mean, in the sense of like fast fashion websites are going for trendy, and luxury can still be like trendy, as in like there can be something that's a luxury product that trends, but the use of the word is different. So I'm talking about the former, as in like how fast fashion websites can be trendy. If you kind of made the shoes like that, then the expectation that your target audience has, because of the kind of positioning that you've like gone for, is that why is this out of stock? Like, excuse me, like what is this? Like they'll be like, oh, you're slow to restock, nah, you're not serious, nah. Like I feel like it's just part and parcel with that positioning that you choose to do. So that would be my kind of 2 cents on that. Yeah. What else is there about a brat store? I feel like there's also, okay. No, I'm not gonna say that. I'm not gonna say it. But um, yeah, it's just a really good way to kind of like comprehensively create a brand around an IP or around a sort of cultural phenomenon. And I think, again, like going back to the example of Harley Quinn, I feel like for me personally, the kind of merch that I like from like movie franchises or like comic book companies, different things like that, or even like Disney, I like merch that's sort of functional, or at least kind of that pretends to be functional. And I know that sounds like maybe confusing, or maybe it's not confusing. Like, yeah, I'm not going to assume that it's confusing. So I think that in having those things that look like slightly sort of naturalistic, like they can slightly blend into your either your wardrobe or your desk, or like they're sort of details of that diegetic world that you're like a fan of, but that can easily fit into the real world in a very like inconspicuous way. I find that that's really cool, and that's what kind of would motivate me to buy them. So going off the example of like Harley Quinn, for example, with the like outfits that are inspired by her, but not necessarily like a copy of her costume. I feel like again people would really kind of like that, especially in the era that it was. You know when athleisure was all about everywhere, like athleisure, tracksuits, that kind of thing. Can you imagine like a Harley Quinn sort of tracksuit, like velour kind of material, but still with the like dark blue and red, like color blocking, and just like made like really cute and stuff. Like almost you can, if you can imagine like 90s like Tommy Hilfiger streetwear kind of collections, or like 90s like baby fat, but then Harley Quinn, but then sold in like I don't know what you call it, but like stores that do like fandom merchandise. The way that thing would have been snatched up, swept off the racks, swept up, chopped up, that is what I call like really, really clever sort of merchandising. And because bringing like, obviously your target audience, right, for Harley Quinn clothing would be like that kind of, I suppose at the time, maybe like millennial young female audience, although obviously it's not exclusive, but that's just like what they would target as a company. So if you've got the IP and then you also have insights as to like what they're wearing, like the fashion trends and the beauty trends, boom, mash them together, make it look nice, and like do it intentionally, and just watch, like literally just watch how what you've made like feeds itself into the conversation around the character, and feeds itself into that like larger fandom sort of expression and like consumption of products around like the fandom. I personally find that insane. Like I find that so interesting, to the point where I actually wanted like for like to do in the future. I wanted to do stuff around like merchandising for IPs, and particularly like movies, because I just found it so like almost limitlessly creative, because it's like you can kind of make what you, like different things, and then kind of tie it to the diegetic sort of, like make it make sense in the world of the IP, and also make it make sense for someone to buy it, and for like for it to kind of have multiple uses. Obviously that's not a must, but that's just what I think is really cool and what people really respond to, especially, this is a like side note, especially if your audience is like aging up. You want things that can kind of like be versatile and age up with them. So like yeah, I just wanted to be in that space. I wanted to like do that as a sort of career. That like I even did like different subjects in high school because I felt that they would help for this purpose. And yeah, I think it's just so cool like how things come full circle, because now I'm talking about it. I'm like, there's literally nothing stopping me from still doing that. Like even within what I'm sort of planning to do nowadays, I feel like there's nothing stopping me from still like revisiting that. And I think that that's so cool. Like it's just insane like how much fun you can have with it while still making it make sense for like your business, and still making it make sense for like your audience. Yeah. Not to say that existing merchandise doesn't make sense, but I mean like put your own spin on it, you know, like put your own little flavor, seasoning, just season it a little bit with your swag, and just like make something different, you know, make something exciting. So yeah, that's kind of that. There was something else I wanted to say, but I've since forgotten it. So that's fine. That's fine. Oh yeah, it was that basically if people had made those like velour kind of like Harley Quinn athleisure tracksuit type of thing, the way people would still be wearing it today, the way people would still be wearing it, and maybe they won't wear it as in like in the same way as people wore like head to toe Adidas stripes plus like, you know, all the other kind of late 2010s fashion pieces all at once. But they'd still wear like the tracksuit bottoms, but they might pair it with a cute like cropped Y2K top, for example, or they might wear the tracksuit jacket, and then they'd like they would kind of remix it with the more current sort of fashion inspirations, or even like what I was saying last week about the aesthetics. They might still take those pieces and repurpose them and reimagine them for their new aesthetics. Like, can you just imagine? Can you just imagine that? Like, I feel like that would be so cool. And I feel like that's what people, at least like the circles that I've kind of um sort of like been witness to, I feel like that's what they want from their fandoms, and that's what they want from like the people who have the rights to do that with the IP. And yeah, it's basically just a really interesting space. And I definitely think that the more time goes by, the more that audience like grows up and gets like purchasing power and gets like um you know like grows up as in like either they go to school and learn all these things, or they just practice their craft and get better at it, the more we'll see stuff like this like coming up naturally, like not even from like I don't know, I just feel like we're going to see it come from different sources, not just like me, for example, like saying I want to do it. I feel like people who you don't have to have ever heard my radio show to have this idea is what I mean, because it's something so intrinsic to how you want to express yourself. Yeah. So that's kind of that. This has been a really fun episode. I didn't actually think I would be revisiting my old like dream job today, but somehow we ended up there. And yeah, it's been insightful for me as well as I hope for you. And don't forget, I'll be here every Saturday, 3 p.m. So definitely stay tuned for next week's episode. I might do the whole thing about like commodification of luxury and cargo culting luxury, or I might do something else. Also, if you have some ideas, you can message the Instagram page. It's BRAIDAR underscore. So all lowercase, BRAIDAR underscore. And then you can like put ideas. I'm not saying like, oh, every idea that comes, like I'll definitely be able to do them, but I will definitely like the ones that I can do and the ones I feel like capable and comfortable with doing. Yeah, like why not? So yeah, thank you guys, and I will see you then. Have a great rest of the weekend.